don't we just look badass in that picture? Sean Turinjo did that for us, and I asked him to make me look athletic, so.
Look at those guns.
All right, guys. So, like I said, it's going to be like a live episode of Trekyards, and it's about 50 years of a ship called Enterprise. So, as always, I am Captain Foley.
And I'm Commander Cockings. Welcome to the show, guys.
And we are live from Trekonderoga 2016. And thank you, everybody, for attending. You guys are awesome. So, first off, who here's seen Trekyards?
Right. Yes.
Who knows what Trekyards is that hasn't seen it? Because I see a few hands that aren't up. All right, well, Trekyards is a weekly web series on YouTube. We document the ships and tech from Trek. We have other content as well. Like lately, we've been 7 days a week, ever since we attended Denver Comic-Con. But our big release is on Saturday. That's where we break down a ship or talk to a designer, such as John Eves, Doug Drexler. So anyway, if you haven't checked it out, go to YouTube, type in Trekyards, or just search it on Google. You'll find it. We're up to 160 episodes now. What are we at?
We released an episode literally 58 minutes ago. It's the D5 Part 2 with John Eves, 172.
There you go.
So go check that out. 143 views in 57 minutes.
Anyway, let's get to the first picture. So in 1966, there was a little idea, a spark generated by Gene Roddenberry to create a show called Star Trek. And of course, he had to hire a production designer. He hired Matt Jeffries, who did quite a few interesting design ideas for the ship. And Matt Jeffries was a real-world designer, and he was in the military. So his ships follow a very realistic feel and vibe. So yeah, one of the things that was different about Star Trek was it was a realistic approach to the future and to Star Trek, or not to ship design. You didn't have the Buck Rogers rockets with the flames shooting out the back. It was very, matter and antimatter was very much ahead of its time. So I mean, the fact that they put this much thought into this show was absolutely incredible. And of course,
that's one thing Gene said, no flying saucers, and that was just the style. Although ironically, it is sort of flying saucers plus rocket ships, but in such a clever way.
Yeah, graceful, elegant way. So here's one of the almost finished versions of the ship. The neck's a little bit wonky in this, and so is the secondary hull, but it's getting there. And then, of course, the ship that you guys have all known and loved over the years and walked the corridors of probably by now, the TOS Connie 1701. So there we are. Now, the Enterprise has a length of 289 meters, or 948 feet for all you Americans out there. And crew of 205 for the Cage era, which was 2250s. And then a crew of 430 by the 2260s. So
it is worth pointing out that these are all original renders done by me for you guys to get nice high detail shots. And this particular Enterprise was used using Enterprise in Intramural Darkly. So this is the Defiant, but the Enterprise skin version.
Yes, and it's a little dark on the projected screen, but they look really sharp. You'll see them when you watch the finished episode of this later. So anyway, the crew size almost doubled between Pike's era and Kirk's era. One of the reasons for that was likely due to the slimming down of technology, less big and bulky equipment. So they took it out, revamped the ship, and had more crew space. It wasn't.
Well, if the technology is any indication by the communicator, then the communicator went from that to that. So that's now 200 people easily.
Exactly. Yes. So one of the very interesting things about the Enterprise is, does anybody know why it has the NCC registration? What that means?
Yeah.
Well, okay.
Well, the NCC starts off, Jeffers is a big flyer, and the first two letters, NC, is the designation for the planes. The 170 was part of his plane.
Close.
Damn.
No, that's pretty good. Yeah, like I said, he brought a lot of real world stuff to it, and he was a pilot. So the NCC, the N refers to, where are we here? First letter of an aircraft registration for the United States of America. The second letter, C, is for civil aircraft, which this obviously isn't, and he thought to add the third C just looked cool. So it's been speculated it stands for Naval Construction Contract. And also, it's speculated that 1701 was actually the house number across the street from Gene Roddenberry when he grew up. But it was part of Matt Jeffries' plane number, not the whole number, though. I think it was...
Also, the reason they chose that number is because from a camera, it's easy to tell what it looks like from a distance.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
But where like a 6, it looks a lot like an 8 from a distance.
Exactly. Now let's get into
Very
design.
well thought out, straight from the get-go.
Yeah. Now let's get straight into the design aspects of the Enterprises. So the bridge is located at the very top of the ship, which everybody points out is a weak spot. It's a target. You know, it's right there. Anybody can hit it. But as Doug Drexler likes to say, you're only as good as your best piece of tech. So if your shields go down, you're basically screwed no matter where your bridge is.
And the fact is, these ships are designed to explore and do their thing. So, you know, you need shields to go to warp. You need shields to do any normal situational thing. So if you're in a battle where your shields are down, at that point, you're kind of going beyond the abilities of the ship anyway. You know, you're already in such a bad situation that just in every normal situation, the shield will be enough to hold up against anything. So having a bridge is always protected unless you're against an enemy ship. And then, well, that's not what it's designed for anyway. So.
Yeah, and Gene wanted the bridge on top for a few reasons. First of all, battle never really entered his mind. The ship was an exploration ship. So if they got in a scuffle, whatever, that's not his primary mission. Also, it shows a sense of scale. We know where our heroes are on the ship, and we know roughly how big they are compared to the ship, because we know how big the interior is.
Well, I just had a thought, Stuart, that I hadn't thought last time. If you think about it, all these ships are designed for exploration, just being part of the Federation. The one battleship we know of is the Defiant, and while we know roughly where the bridge is, it's not overly visible, is it?
For the Defiant from Deep Space Nine?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I don't... True, it's inset a little bit, but...
So it's not completely out there. It does change the rule, because it's a battleship.
Yes, exactly. What ties into the whole explorer feel, too, is there's no visible weapons on the Connie. That's something Gene really wanted, because it was a ship of exploration. I mean, how many times did an alien get into their databanks and say, well, you have advanced weaponry? And Kirk's like, yes, but, you know, we're explorers, but that's there for self-defense. He didn't want the ship bristling with weapons. That's one of the reasons there's no visible torpedo ports or phaser turrets on the Constitution class. Now, when you get into stuff like Starfleet battles and some of the ships after, you do see phaser ball turrets on the Connies, which I actually like. I think it looks good. But, of course, it was just a smooth hull surface back then.
And it is worth pointing out, you know, they didn't want to go for the generic-looking sci-fi, and I think it's really good that they didn't design what a weapon would be in this era, because at that time they might have just said, let's put a machine gun on the saucer, and that would have aged terribly. But by having it, you know, not visible, you keep the mystique of technology, and then later on, you know, 20 years motion picture, they were to design what is a weapon in the future, and that luckily went for a good design. Obviously, that's held up since.
Yeah, and another thing worth pointing out is the smooth hull texture and how sleek the TOS Connie looks. You can't see a lot of seam lines, panel lines. The panel line, the deflector grid on the top it's kind of a point of contention. It was penciled in on the final model. It wasn't very obvious, and Polar Lights has released their original 350 scale they released had the grid lines. A lot of people have puttied those in, sanded it down so it's smooth. But they've since released, for the 50th, they've released a smooth version of the saucer if anybody builds models wants to do that. So, but it's worth pointing out.
Well, based on this Defiant version, it's all Aztecing rather than grid lines. So this is a canonical ship from Enterprise, so just putting it out there.
True, good point. And of course, we've got the rust ring on there. Cool little rust ring. Don't really know what that is, but it looks cool. So, I have Ape Brain written down here, Samuel, for Doug Drexler reference. Do you remember what that was about with the futuristic sleekness? You like the word sleekness. So.
Well, you used it first. I'm impressed. Well, I think part of that is the engines. I mean, these are very long, sturdy engines, and if you look at them, look straight to the J, which we'll talk about a little bit later. Everyone knows the J has those, you know, very, very tiny nacelles. But the fact is, this ship is miles long, so those nacelles are huge. In context, this ship, these pylons are thin, are spindly. But that shows advanced technology. The fact that you can have these things, I suppose support isn't the right word because they're meant to be in space. There is no gravity in space, sort of, you know, average flight. But there's lack of ape brain you need to take with these sorts of things. You know, size for this sort of thing doesn't necessarily matter.
Yeah, and that's one of the things that is always brought up too, is the slender, skinny struts and how they don't look like they would do anything. But as Doug Drexler says, ape brain, we got to think futuristic. By then, they might not even need to be attached with anything physical. But the point is, these engines don't provide thrust. They're just the warp coils. They provide the warp bubble that the ship moves in. So there's no actual thrust, so why can't they have something so slender? So, also there's the whole design rules. We just did an episode on design rules where it's supposed to be 2 nacelles instead of, you can only have 2 nacelles because they work in pairs. Andrew Probert's a big believer in that. But of course we see dreadnoughts, we see Saladin scouts, and Sam and myself talked to him about that in our episode, and we decided that why not be able to have a single engine or a single nacelle? Why not have 2 smaller rows of warp coils inside the same body, so you still have your 2 warp coils running in parallel that create your warp bubbles. So now, Samuel, there are other ships named Enterprise, are there not? So here we go. We got all of the ships named Enterprise in order.
Now, this is a funny picture because, wait, what? But this is the true design lineage of the Enterprise from 1960s until all the way to 2004. This is in order of when they were designed. So this is the evolution of the Enterprise as we saw in real life. But it's not exactly what it is in canon. But it's just worth showing.
Absolutely. Do you want to go to the next picture then, where they're actually lined up properly?
Yeah, let's go straight to canon. Let's go straight to canon.
All right. So there we go. We got the design evolution of the Enterprise. Now, what is really cool, actually, about the last picture, I'm going to go back to it for a second, is this is the order they were designed in. So we've got Matt Jeffries, who designed the NX-01, Andrew Probert, who did the refit for the movie, and then Andrew Probert also designed the Enterprise D, which is quite a jump design-wise, but he had thought out the whole process in between as well, because we know we have the Enterprise C, the original one, which is on the conference room wall, which is the Ambassador, or the Ambassador class, but the original concept version by Andrew Probert.
Proto Ambassador.
Yeah, so he had designed that as well on his way to do the D's. So, and then we got Rick Sternbach, who did the C, John Eves, who did the B and the E, and then of course Doug Drexler, who came in and did the NX-01 at the very end. So it's
And you'll note the evolution of this design. You've got to look at it in some small ways. You know, the very first ship, and again, this is the chronological order built for the show. The first 1960s version, they had an okay budget to make the hero of the show, the ship, but that was as what it was. And then you had a movie budget, proper movie budget, to create a hyper detailed refit. Then you had a big, they put a lot of money into building the D. That's why it looks incredible, high details there. The C was a ship of the week, bit of love and care, but again, not as much. The B was then a refitted Excelsior. So Excelsior model was amazing, but then they just added bits on. Then you get to the E, which was half CG, or mostly CG later on, and then physical for the start. It was sort of designed to be both, but was a physical model as well. But the details there, because suddenly you've got, 1990 or 2000, that time period, models are phasing out, but they can make really detailed models. Then the purely CG NX-01. So the details going up, but also budget does make a big difference in how detailed these ships are.
Yeah, and one of the reasons that Rick Sternbach got a chance to design the Ambassador for yesterday's Enterprise, and they didn't use Andrew Probert's Enterprise C, is because there's too many curves on it, basically, too many elegant lines, and to build it would have taken too long for the model makers. So Rick came in and basically built a simpler version, which was easier for them to create, which I think looks great. I used to hate the Ambassador class until I actually had to build one. Now it's one of my favorite ships, and it's very much an Enterprise for me. So,
yeah. Well, I think there's one thing that we've got to point out, before we really get into discussing all of them, is that this is the legacy of the Enterprise, 50 years, but even though different designers have different takes on it, and we're all basing it from the original Constitution class, that simple design, if you look at the whole spectrum of ships, they all still feel Enterprise. You've got Mirandas, you've got Orbeth, all other sorts of ships, but these all have an Enterprise feel. And I think it's incredible that over these 50 years, they've managed to capture something with each ship, and I think each one has a huge, set of good things to go with them.
Absolutely. But each ship was designed for a different mission. As we talked about with the TOS Enterprise, it was an exploration mission. So no visible weaponry. It wasn't really decked out with that many weapons to begin with. But let's go through each mission profile and kind of just see why the designers chose to go the way they did.
Although first, let's look at the broad strokes for a second. At the general, I mean, what do we? If you look at this picture, and the audience obviously is, what do you see as the overall evolution of time between these ships? Without going into specifics, what is the obvious look?
The obvious look is, well, they held true to Matt Jeffries' design. 2 engines, secondary hull, and a saucer. Every one of them. Is that what you were looking for from me?
No, I'm just saying they get bigger, and because these are all to scale. These are all the official models from the show, except the refit. And thanks to Rob on for the B. And everything else, is to scale. So this is the exact evolution. We'll talk in detail about why. But it's interesting to see that time and technology does provide these bigger ships. And it's interesting to see where the jumps are. Between the refit and the B, and then big blue expansion for the B to the C, and then the difference. I mean, people think the E is either bigger or smaller than the D, but they're roughly the same length. Although obviously in terms of actual size, have a lot less room inside the ships.
Yeah, well, that speaks to the role again. So let's go through the roles.
Okay, so this is the full detailed version of the history of the Enterprise that we did, and we had great fun just working this out in our test version of this. So the NX-01, Earth's first exploration ship, Warp 5, led to the ability to go between star systems, not in an instant, far from, but as opposed to Warp 4, Warp 3, it made it practical. Rather than months, it would take weeks. Warp is not, exactly as you'd think a car. Every mile an hour it's quicker. It's an exponential curve. So the faster you get an exponential increase in speed. The NX-1, like I said, was the biggest ship of its era, designed for exploration, biggest crew, only about 80 people, but that was quite big at the time. Had everything you could want from a spacefaring thing. It was designed to be out for months at a time. And really was there. The weapons were pretty limited for the time, but again, the most advanced. Couldn't really compete with other races. Romulans easily outdid it. The Andorians. It was really the baby brother. That was kind of because the Vulcans were keeping us down a bit. But that was the first exploration ship, and you can see it's just really the ship is just a saucer, which is a living space, and then there isn't really any. I mean, those pontoons, which are the neck sections, those aren't really meant to have people in, and then obviously the Bassards don't, and that section. There's kind of like the roll bar on the Miranda is actually a warp stabilizer, which helps reinforce the warp area. So really, it's just that saucer. And while the saucer is the same as the Connie, roughly in size, you don't have a secondary hull or even a neck to help give more space.
Yeah, like you said to begin with, limited weaponry. They didn't put the phase cannons in until they started running into people that were shooting at them. Because I think Trip, I think, says, wouldn't it be nice if we ran into somebody that didn't actually try to kill us at one point? And they started out with photonic missiles, which of course got upgraded later.
Spatial torpedoes, then photonic torpedoes.
There you go. Yes. All right, so then we'll move on to the Connie. Sorry. This was more of an established federation. You had a fleet now, so they want to do some exploring. It was a Cold War era, basically, with the Klingons. Romulans were kind of there, but not so much. So they were trying to expand and explore the Federation a little bit. So again, no visible weaponry, nothing that looks hostile or aggressive. Beautiful ship.
Awesome. And one interesting thing about the Connie is that it's not an explorer per se. It wasn't designed to go out. A 5-year mission, yes, but it was a well-rounded ship. It was a heavy cruiser, which means it has good firepower, good defenses, and a good crew. There are other sorts of ships that could probably have done the job as well, but it was a well-rounded ship because they knew that you could accidentally find yourself in a Klingon fleet and think, oh damn, need to have those phasers. So it was a good, well-rounded ship, and obviously the size, like I said, to 400 crew. So between the first Enterprise to the second Enterprise, 80 to 400. That's a hell of a jump, but it was designed for these long missions.
Well, you got to remember too that Pike's Enterprise was only 200 crew, so there was that small incremental step. I mean, the ship was the same size, but there was a lot less crew. Let's put it that way. Then, of course, we move on to Andrew Probert's refit Enterprise, which is for the movies, which, again, like I said, increased hostilities with the Klingons. The Romulans had disappeared by this point. We didn't see the Romulans for 80 years during that time. But this ship, and the reason it got refitted, the Enterprise was the only Constitution-class ship that went on its 5-year mission that actually returned from its 5-year mission. So that's why their insignia became the insignia for the United Federation of Planets. And the Enterprise got a refit, basically a rebuild from the ground up, from the superstructure up into the refit, which is beautiful. It's probably the best Enterprise in most people's opinions. So,
Well, this just got a general upgrade of technology, faster warp, visible weapons, torpedoes that are straight there. This was in a response probably as well just to the level of Klingons' aggression potentially getting higher, which then obviously it culminated in the peace treaty at Khitomer, the pre-one, the one in Star Trek 6. So that was like, now we need to settle this because it's been there for a while. And then the Enterprise A gets decommissioned, which was, I think, the Yorktown. And then the Enterprise B. Now, what's interesting about the B is that the B and the C are kind of a nebulous point in Trek history because we only ever see them in one appearance and obviously books, but those are, pretty darn side canon. The Enterprise A was decommissioned in Star Trek 6 or just after. And interestingly, within 1 year or 12 months or a little bit less than 12 months, the B was launched. So it was literally that quick, which means they already had one built, ready to go. Presumably it was just like the Enterprise A, the refit was just a refit in Excelsior, wasn't a scratch built. And suddenly you've got peace of the Klingons. That's the major race out there. Like I said, Romulans aren't there anymore. So let's go explore again. I mean, Sulu was exploring on the Excelsior, so we know that class of ship was designed to go out and explore, Beta Quadrant and things. And this ship, far, far bigger, far stronger, far more tech, 5 phaser ball turrets on the front, much larger crew. This ship was meant to go out and explore with a young crew, a Sulu at the helm. Didn't go too well in the first pre-mission, but what is known is that, after the fact, John Harriman was a good captain. He did do good things, and the B was then lost, I believe, 20 or so years later. Because one more interesting thing about the Enterprise is that how long they're in service. The NX-01 was decommissioned within 10 years, which is kind of silly. The Enterprise was around 45 years. The refit, that lasted, the few movies, and that's about 15 years. The B, we don't really know, and the C was about 30, 40 years, so that did pretty well. The D was the series we saw, so 7 to 8 years, and the E is still alive and kicking.
all right, so moving on to the next one, which is basically a battleship, the Enterprise C.
Mm-hmm.
This thing was made for wartime, I would assume. This first indication of new technology. We got phaser strips now instead of ball turrets. And I'm not even sure the crew of the C right offhand. Does anyone know? No one knows?
I think it's like 550 or something.
Yeah, okay. So, yeah, definitely a ship that's not really geared towards exploration, I don't think, just by looking at it. I think it's more of a battleship. It's very rugged, very sturdy, very well built, and can definitely take a shit kicking, so pardon my language.
Yeah, this was a response to the times. It had the new warp nacelles, which now finally have the red basards and the blue glow. So that was a big technological leap. just look at the sizing and the style of the ship. This was a huge technology increase. But if you look at the bridge, which we've seen yesterday Enterprise, compared to the sprawling Enterprise B bridge and then the D bridge, is a pretty condensed. Obviously, they're limiting by set space, but it was a pretty small bridge. They were making things smaller to deal with the threats out there because, obviously they got destroyed by the Romulans. They were starting to be more of a nuisance, and they just had to really up the technology for the time.
The interior of the bridge of the Ambassador is quite small and kind of purpose-built.
Yes.
But if you look at the dome on this thing, it's much bigger than the B bridge. And your head's in the way, but it's a lot bigger than the D bridge as well. So I'm wondering if perhaps... It doesn't move the window, retard.
That's your job.
I'm wondering if perhaps there's an extra armor or some kind of protection around the bridge on the sea. Because, look, compare the bridge sizes, and the dome is just so much bigger. I don't know why that would be. Unless because it is a battleship and was built for that.
The problem with the Excelsior is that they didn't scale some of the subtle details properly. If you also compare the Excelsior bridge to the Connie bridge, same problem. The Excelsior bridge suddenly looks much, much smaller because they didn't properly scale the details when they designed the size. Obviously, once you set the size in stone for the Excelsior, you can't suddenly say, and now we've built a ship twice the size. So that's a slight problem overall with the Excelsior class. But yeah.
True. Okay, well now...
It's a TV show, guys.
Now we can move on to the D.
Now, this was, interestingly, it was sort of retconned that the Cardassian War was going on because, at the start of TNG, it was another time of peace. Everyone's doing well. Families, it's an amazing ship. It's an amazing new style. But We do know that Cardassian War was finishing when the ship was being designed, so obviously they took into account the need for extra armament, scaling up, designed to also be able to take on a Galore class, so it has that punch, but also pushed into, again, we've had this time of war, we're now moving into peace, let's make an exploration craft, and not just an exploration craft, but a craft that can have families, and you can take it from there.
Yeah, and if you notice too, I never really noticed this until now actually, the phaser strips on the D are actually blended more into the hull color than they are on the C. They're less prominent, almost because it is a ship of exploration. We don't want to look too hostile, I guess. It makes sense.
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, from Babylon 5, that having, alien cultures can mistake anything for anything. I mean, it's amazing that they can all speak English. I mean, that's pretty amazing. Okay, Universal Translator, but you know what I mean. In Babylon 5, they have the weapon ports out and it starts the human Mbari War, so good choice to have them.
Yeah, that's true. Now, originally, Andrew Probert designed the Enterprise D to have a crew of about 4 to 5,000 people. That's why it's so huge.
It's a big ship.
Gene Roddenberry basically said we don't have enough extras to show that, so the crew's going to be 1,012 people. So that's the reason the ship is so huge. And when we did our episode on the Galaxy class, a lot of the decks were actually unused space, which could be reformatted and repurposed into whatever you needed, scientific labs or for evacuations, things like that. So it does make sense, the smaller crew size, but I think 1,000's a little light for this ship, personally.
Well, like you said, I mean, this is the true starbase. Out of all the ships we've seen, they have different mission profiles, but this is such a big ship, such a relatively small crew, as you said. Every resource you could want. The fact they have 3 or 4 holodeck, so many transporter arrays. I mean, this is redundancy, everything in one bundle. So having this extra space means you're going to be channeling dignitaries, you're going to be doing all these different things. You might pick up crew here, and they might you might be doing saving people from one planet, moving them to another. This is a very, very well-rounded ship, and for all accounts, it's amazing.
And one good thing about it too is it wasn't just meant for exploration. I mean, they had known from past history that you're going to have problems with the Klingons, you're going to have problems with the Romulans. So this ship was designed to keep the families and civilians safe on the saucer section. When the Cobra Head attack secondary hull section went into battle, they should have done that in basically most of the situations that were hostile in the show, but due to budget constraints, they didn't. They did show it in the first episode, which was amazing. So that was the initial plan for this.
And then they crashed.
Yeah, just you mentioned Starbase again, and that's basically what made me think of that. Because you keep the crew safe or the civilians safe on the saucer section. You take the battle section into battle, ironically enough.
But there is some subtle things. I mean, one amazing thing that was designed, because you got to think back to the idea this was designed after the refit, because obviously we're talking about this in canonical order, but the idea of phaser strips came in here. Having a ring of emitters, thousands of emitters that let you fire, that let you build this energy up and then shoot it from any portion for any part of the ship. So rather than having these ball turrets, it would turn, rotate, fire. This is a complete arc. And the power output again is so much larger. So when you look into canon and see the C has these much smaller phaser strips, this big jump in technology did really improve the weapon output. And having, I think we talked on our episode, it has multi-fire photon torpedo launchers that can shoot 7 torpedoes in a few seconds. This thing can throw out a lot of punishment very quickly, even if the Borg can take it.
Yeah. So. All right, so let's move on then to the next Enterprise, which of course it's strictly designed for combat. This is a battleship through and through. Corridors are small again. It's not as comfortable and roomy. You got smaller corridors like you did on the Enterprise A and any other of the battleships. This thing packs a mean wallop. And it does look generally the same size as the Enterprise D, but when you see a shot from the front, there's actually a lot less internal volume in the Enterprise E. So just crew there, no families, no civilians.
Yeah, this was a big change. You've got to remember that you had those 7 years of TNG, and then you had the Dominion War, and that was a war that was unlike anything else we've ever seen. And the Borg threat, as you point out in our test version, the Defiant and the Sovereign have both been designed at the same time. You couldn't have families; they just weren't safe. So suddenly you're building a much more compact ship, much more sophisticated in the sense that technology has just shrunk. the way I equate it, every other enterprise, apart from the Connie to the refit, is that technology, they keep improving so much and just letting it out, letting it go and just building a bigger ship. The E is a great example of, we've had these 7 years, 8 years of advancement. Let's use that to have the same tech, but shrunk, so we can pack it in. Much more high output impulse engines, much more efficient warp engines, all these things, decked out weapons, give it quantum launchers. I mean, all these things, it's just it's evolving towards that most refined version of what a Starfleet ship could be at the time, which, yes, is a battleship, but I mean, it fundamentally, when you've just been through the Dominion War, or in the Dominion War, you can still go and explore, but every other race is evolving at the same time, and especially with the Borg. And if you bump into a Borg cube, literally nothing in Ocean can stop it, but at least you need a ship that can cope with something if you're going to build new ships. So it's that sort of mentality.
I think it's worth being said too that when John Eves designed the Enterprise E, he never considered saucer separation initially, and then a lot of people brought it up to him. So he did design a saucer separation sequence for it, which is much more for emergency use than it is for, like, let's say the D, where it would be battle section, because the whole ship is a battle section.
Yeah, he was asked to do separate concept sketches, and he helped flesh it out. And it's interesting. This is the first contact version of the E, the one from the books that you'd see. So it's got a very nice light hull color. It feels much more like the other ships. But when the Enterprise E got refitted, because the Enterprise E is a strange one, it was started as a physical model, but all the complicated shots were done with CG because you could do that. Insurrection, they didn't use ILM, they used a separate CG house, and they rebuilt the E because why not? And then third movie, again, they rebuilt the E again because they lost the E from Insurrection. They just didn't bother saving it properly, and now every model for Insurrection is lost, which is such a shame. There were subtle improvements. Every single film, they got John to just refine the shapes. So how the neck, because if you look at this version, and if you want to zoom in, Stuart, to the neck, it's just not as smooth as it could be. But when they finally get to the E version, it's a beautiful little curve, and he also kept bringing the nacelles down further and further, so it'd be much more of a compact profile. And the Enterprise E version is much, much darker. You haven't got this bright Aztecing, you've got much darker hull. It's awful to do CG renders with because you've got to throw so much light at it to get any sort of effect. It's terrible. Although they were going to do a refit version of the E for the next Star Trek movie, which you see hinted at the last film, which has a lovely Aztec pattern. I would have had extra weapons and extra all this jazz. But yeah.
Yeah, it's really funny to see the ship's evolution from the first time you see it. Just the subtle changes, the engines being lowered. Like, did they really put it into a dry dock to lower the engines? Like, I don't know.
Well, I want to ask you a question, Stuart. Sort of give a live Q&A here. So we've talked about all the Enterprises, and we're on. If you want to go to the full picture, just so you can see the evolution again. The name Enterprise is so synonymous with exploration, but that's not necessarily its main purpose. Do you think, though, seeing the very first Enterprise being the NX-01 being Earth's first go out into the galaxy, and the last Enterprise being a battleship, do you still think the legacy of Enterprise, the name, the history, do you think, even though they're all a bit different, it all is justifiably Enterprise?
Absolutely. It keeps the same look, it keeps the same feel. It does. There is definitely some carrying on of the, not only just the shapes, but the overall feel of the ship. So, yeah, absolutely.
And it is worth throwing out another bit of fun little trivia. So John Eves, we mentioned, also designed the B, and if you look at the B and the C, with being the E, sorry, I mean, you can see that the C is based off the D, and you can see that the B is based off the E, or the E is continuity, that the E took influence from the B. I mean, just stylistically, I mean, they're going back to a golden age there of design. So it's interesting to see he designed both, but he loves Excelsior, so he went with that sort of design.
Yeah. All right. So there are more Enterprises in this, are there not, Samuel?
And I want to point out that I made this render last night just to give you. There's two more pictures, and these are the canonical Enterprises from all different shows. But there are more Enterprises that are either mostly canon, side canon, or whatever. So if you guys thought this was it, there's more Enterprises. So Stuart, take us to the next picture. So that's actually the Enterprises, and we're missing one. So that's almost all the Enterprises. There's a few more. Did you think there were that many, Stuart? Did you think they had that many, Stuart? I mean, I guess you did know.
But, yeah, I know that there's that many, yeah, but a lot of people didn't know about some of these anyway.
Shall we start from the start?
Let's start from the start, sure.
and this is in chronological order.
So of course we've got the Enterprise shuttle, which never actually flew in space, but it was to test the airframe and the shuttle design. And of course the fans are the reason it's called Enterprise, because of Star Trek. So that's amazing. And this
is all accurate scale, guys. So it puts a lot of stuff into perspective here.
Yeah. And then of course we have the Enterprise ring ship, which was a cruiser, like a cruise ship kind of thing for passengers.
I believe it was, having read a little, I believe it was the first warp 1.5 or 2.5, somewhere around there, and it was in, I think, Rick Sternbach's, evolving the universe with all the books he made, and this is meant to be another exploration vessel, but it's based off of Matt Jeffries' concept. That's why it's a nice little fit into canon. It's not actually canon because I haven't seen it on screen, but it's sort of soft canon in the sense this is a part of the lineage. I mean, no, it was canon because it was seen on the TMP flight deck, wasn't it? Or rec deck.
Yeah.
Enterprise.
So yes, it's canon, guys.
There you go. And then of course we move up to the ship that in my opinion never existed, the NX-01. Messing with my timeline. But yeah. Samuel's still there? Uh-oh.
I hate when that happens. No!
Yes, maybe he'll call me back.
Was it your last comment? Was it your last comment?
Oh, it might be. The English are so easily offended. So we have the NX-01 here, and then of course right beside it is the NX-01 refit, which we never actually saw. Doug Drexler designed that with the secondary hull. It's really a bad shot of that for a top view because it doesn't look much different at all. But he always designed the NX-01, he always held it up, and he always pictured a secondary hull on it. He made sure that proportions would be right to add that. So let me see if I can call Samuel back. I don't know what happened here. And of course we got the Constitution class that we all know and love. And then the Phase 2 Enterprise, which Tobias was actually showing us in his discussion earlier, which would have been the new Phase 2 series, which they ended up scratching that and going with the motion picture instead. But the Phase 2 Enterprise, I'm not really a huge fan of. I don't like the new engine design. I don't like the new struts. The secondary hull kind of bothers me a little bit. But I love the Constitution class. So they get confused why I don't like the Phase 2. So does anyone out there really like the Phase 2 Enterprise at all?
It's cool.
Yeah, it's a nice step, but
It looks like a good transition between the original Conning and the refit.
exactly, yeah.
What I think is interesting to note, especially with Tobias's version,
Mm-hmm.
is unlike the one that was designed by Mike Miner and others for the 70s show, which was a much more extensive physical refit of the rest of the ship.
Mm-hmm.
What he did for New Voyages really was just an engine system swap. And I was struck very notably by how well that actually worked on the original space frame.
Yeah, exactly, yeah. So anyway, then of course we go into the refit, which most people will agree is their favorite Enterprise. Who out there, who's the refit's their favorite?
The original, the one and only.
Okay. Then the Enterprise B, which is a lot of people aren't a huge fan of. Jesus. A lot of people aren't a huge fan of it just because it is basically an Excelsior with stuff slapped on it. And not everybody's a fan of everything that was added to it. I personally like the Enterprise B. I think the addition to the secondary hull that bulks it out a bit is something that was a great idea. I'm not, as everyone that watches Trekyards knows, I hate the Excelsior with a passion. So, but I think the Enterprise B, the additions they made, make it a little bit better. So, then of course we have the Enterprise C, or the Ambassador class.
Stuart,
Yes.
did you ever ask Rick how come there was never an impulse on top of the saucer section?
No, but I want to.
I mean, that's the only thing I got against it, because I always thought, since it's going to the D, it'd be nice to have the one where it's at, was also because all the other Enterprises, the lifeboat was the saucer section, but the C would be the first one where you actually see the lifeboat pods.
Mm-hmm.
And,
Yeah, the C is really lacking something on the back of the saucer section there. It needs something. I mean, it does have the impulse engine down lower on the neck, but I always thought the C would look amazing as a dreadnought. Put a third engine, a third nacelle on that back of that saucer. I think it really would make it look good. If you believe that dreadnoughts exist. Then the Enterprise D, which is just a huge luxury liner, which every time we have a discussion about which one of these we'd want to command, this one is the one I pick because I have holodecks and comfort. And I can basically be on any other Enterprise I want with the holodeck, right? So. Then Enterprise E, which again is battleship. It would be cool to be in command of one, but I don't know, not a lot of creature comforts. You do have the holodeck still, but. And then there's the Enterprise F. Now this was designed by, Star Trek Online had a design contest to design the next Enterprise. This is what was submitted by one gentleman who we've spoken to on the show, and it got picked for Enterprise F. We lost internet, yes.
Yeah, the whole building did.
Yep.
All right, we got internet.
Wow, being applauded into the room. I love it. Can I have it every time, Stuart?
That was something on this end. The internet dropped for the whole building, so.
Right, where were we? I have no idea.
Talking about the new Enterprises.
Okay, well, yeah, I mean, just briefly go back to the NXs. That's a fun one, obviously, you probably said, because that's the Dud Drexler concept. And you can see the evolution hull colour. That is the original model. And the Phase 2 that Tobias did, that's the exact one you guys just saw, because he's given us all the orthos. And then the F is from Star Trek Online, and that's 1,000 meters. So it's a huge, huge ship. Although it doesn't appear that big in the actual game, because that would be ridiculous. I mean, you couldn't really compare them in a physical battle. It's still, that's how big. And it shows another evolution of tech between 2378, I think, is when Nemesis-ish, and then 2409. So there is an Enterprise for a while, and then this big one. Okay, last picture.
And the last picture, yes. Which includes the Enterprise J, which is quite big.
Yes.
Yes. 3 miles long, I believe.
3 miles. 3 times the F. So this is every Enterprise we know about.
Yeah, this was designed by Doug Drexler as well for an episode of Enterprise. You see it for like maybe 15 seconds.
Well, we see the underside of the hull. That's all we ever see, and sort of a graphic. And then he designed it in his own time to sort of fill it out. But this is one of his orthos. I worked out, and it really puts into perspective. But you've got to remember those F to J. So there is still a decent amount of time, though. If you think about the leaps between the E and the F, I mean, it's not too far away. But you think the Enterprise D is a big one? It's not. There are bigger Enterprises out there.
And everybody complains about the J that the nacelles are so spindly, but really, size-wise, if you look at them, they are pretty big compared to the other Enterprises where they attach to the nacelles. So, but
it's just out of context. You never see it with anything else.
And again, Doug always says the ape brain, the spindly struts won't matter in the future. So, there you have it.
I mean, if you look at the front, if you look at the start of the struts, I mean, that's the size of Enterprise E saucer. So clearly, yeah, they're still pretty big. So that is every Enterprise, guys, all the way. So Stuart, restart from the bottom again. Restart from the space shuttle, and let's just take you through, just so you really get a sense of the scale increase from 19 whatever for the space shuttle to 2600s.
Yep. So we got the
bigger and bigger.
Yeah, there you go. While we're doing that, since we kind of got to wrap this up soon, Samuel, what's your favorite Enterprise?
Well, that's a hard one. Well, I mean, okay, we had this discussion briefly before. In this discussion, you can't say the refit or the Connie, because both are classically perfect in their own way. Well, you can't, can you? Otherwise, we'll both say Connie, and then both say refit, or vice versa. So what other Enterprise is a better question? And overall, I love the D with a passion, the Enterprise D, not the other thing. I love the Galaxy class. But the E, I think, is a beautiful overall ship. I think it covers all the bases. It's obviously a bit more Constitution class than the D, and it's just an elegant, graceful design with a lot of kick-ass as well.
All right, I'd have to agree with you. The E is pretty amazing, but I would say I like the Enterprise C a little bit better. The Ambassador class, like I said, it's really grown on me, and it's got it's got everything I like in an Enterprise. It looks like the TOS Enterprise, but it also incorporates a lot of the TNG stuff. So I don't know. I'm gonna have to go with the Ambassador class. So.
I think, there's one real shame with all this. Obviously, the J and the F there. Well, the F is Star Trek Online, and all the other ships is, NX refit in the phase 2. They're all sort of side canon, but we had a lot of the NX1, a lot of the Connie, a lot of the refit, but the B and the C really didn't get anywhere near their time. The B was basically embarrassed in its one appearance, and the C was annihilated in its one appearance. So it would be really nice. I know we now know the new show is taking place 10 years before TOS, but in the future, I think we should see something else with these Enterprises, because both are glorious designs, and both, I'd love to see what a corridor looks like for the C. I'd love to see how the B evolved in tech. I mean, these are stories that should be told, because every other ship we have such a real sense of, and these ships we just don't. And especially considering the Enterprise C is one of the longest lived Enterprises. So, yeah, it did a lot of good.
Yeah. All right, guys. We'll open up the floor to a few questions now, if you guys want. Any questions?
Come on. We're Trekyards, come on.
Why is it, like, just I saw your, on YouTube, you have the Fleet Yards episode?
Yep.
For Dostar Pegasus. Why Pegasus and not Glide?
Okay, he asked for Fleet Yards he saw the trailer for the Pegasus, why we chose the Pegasus for the next Fleet Yards episode. Samuel, I'll let you field that.
Well, I asked for the Pegasus because I have the model used in the show, so I have the complete, detailed, beautiful version, so it looks as good as it is, because it is the one, which is then very hard to render. It takes like days, but it's one of my favourite 3 sci-fi designs, the Pegasus. I think it's just an amazing design. Now seeing it up close, all the subtle details, just beautiful. I wanted the Daedalus to be the 3rd one, but we didn't have the model and we couldn't get it in the timeline, so Prometheus was instead. But support us, and then you'll see those episodes.
Any other questions, Dan?
Where's the Mark IV Enterprise class?
Where's the Mark IV?
Mark IV.
We don't have it in here because we didn't want to include that. He asked where the Mark IV Enterprise was, the Enterprise class, which has rear-facing photon torpedoes, and it's FASA, basically. But we didn't include it because... Yes. Any other questions? Yes?
Clark Kent, Daily Planet. We know the Constitution class has a bowling alley, as cited in the episode The Make It Time. Could you confirm that it is above the swimming pool, and how many lanes are in the bowling alley?
Well, that's a great question. That's just super, man. Anyway, that's my brother, everyone. My brother, Steve. My brother, Steve, just asked about the bowling alley in the Constitution class. How many lanes, and what else? Is that it?
Above the swimming pool.
Of course it's above the swimming pool, because if it's below it, you're going to get warped lanes when you got a leak. So yes, it is. As for lanes, I think there's 5, actually. 4 or 5. Not sure, though. Trying to recall.
Well, on the J, on the Enterprise J, you can see the scaling. Those lights are actually skyscrapers. That's the sizing. So there's at least a few buildings of bowling. So if you really want a bowling alley, go straight to the J. Just skip the funny.
Exactly. All right, guys, I think we're going to call it a wrap. But we got 2 quotes we want to leave you guys with. First off, we have fate protects fools, small children, and ships named Enterprise. Thank God, because we keep getting more. And Samuel, do you want to wrap up with the last one, the best Enterprise quote ever?
Let's make sure history never forgets the name Enterprise.
All right, guys, thank you very much for coming, and hope you enjoyed it. Sorry for the technical issues, but I don't know if we'll keep some of the technical issue bits in.
That makes sense.
So when we edit this, Sam, you're going to keep some of the technical issue bits in just for these guys so they can remember?
Yay. Yay.
We don't know. All right, so thank you very much, guys, and awesome.